Hi guys, it's Beyond Left and Right back again with another video. As promised, today I'm going to be responding to some of your comments. The channel is sitting at around 228 subscribers, and over the past few weeks I've noticed something quite interesting happening in the comment section. As the channel has grown, certain patterns have started to emerge, and I think those patterns tell us something useful, not just about the channel itself, but about political discussion in general. I was going to originally comment on 5 of my videos. I was going to comment on the flagship video about the left-right paradigm, and then the 4 Bad and Panada FD signifier videos. But I've had to drop those 4 videos because the video would have been too long. I will make a comment about those videos. At the start of that whole debacle, there were people who were just criticizing and being contradictory for the sake of being contradictory. They were like taking kind of like ridiculous positions on the side of FD signifier. And then as this whole thing has been drawn out and FD signifier looks, foolish as a result, those people have just simply died away and disappeared. And you kind of see these kinds of patterns as you kind of watch something evolve. The other trend I've noticed in general on the channel was when the channel first came out, I would get a lot of scoffing responses of like, "What are you talking about? The left-right paradigm is nonsensical, and the left is this and the left." And I'd get these kind of like matter-of-factly just kind of dismissals. And what's happened is that also those comments have started disappearing off because people didn't know me from Adam. They didn't know if I was somebody serious or somebody trolling or something like that. And then I think as people have kind of seen that I've gained credibility with my arguments, I think a new kind of person's kind of joined aboard, and these are kind of people who like seriously argue, and I think that's a very good sign to see. So I'm very happy with that. Broadly speaking, I think I can divide the commenters into 3 categories. The first category are the people who broadly agree with the message of the channel. They may not agree with every single point I make, but they genuinely understand where I'm coming from and why I'm making these arguments. They probably already came to the same conclusions independently themselves and have now come across a space like this that reflects their positions more closely. These are usually the people liking the videos, sharing them, and helping the channel grow. I appreciate this group because they're the people who make it worthwhile for me to keep producing content. I really appreciate their words of encouragement, as well as knowing there are people out there who are able to see through the cracks the same way that I do. I genuinely want this Beyond Left and Right project. I want this project to be something that is community driven. And I want to thank you guys because you're motivating me enormously and helping to drive the engine of this project. A lot of the ideas discussed on this channel can feel quite lonely when you're working through them on your own. So seeing people engage with them, expand upon them, and sometimes independently arrive at very similar conclusions is incredibly encouraging. The second category of people, they're different from the first, but it's a very valuable group of people. Perhaps the most valuable group for the purposes of stress testing our novel political position. These are the people who disagree, sometimes quite strongly, but they do so in good faith. They're not interested in scoring points or winning internet arguments. They're genuinely trying to understand what I'm saying and are asking serious questions from a different political perspective. Some of the best conversations I've had since starting this channel have come from people in this category, and while we don't always agree, they often force me to sharpen my arguments and think more carefully about my own assumptions. I'll be showing a few examples of that shortly. The key aspect you'll see with this kind of person is that they don't attach themselves to any particular argument personally. They present the arguments as a means of stress testing and understanding the theory better. And you can see that when they process your responses instead of getting like immediately defensive and then returning with offensive insults. That brings me on to the third category. Let me just take a quick sip of tea because my voice is getting quite dry. The third category is the one every YouTube creator invariably encounters. These are the professional contrarians of the internet. Like locusts, they drift from channel to channel, convinced that they're the smartest person in every room they enter, despite often making the weakest arguments imaginable. They're not interested in understanding what you're saying. In many cases, they haven't even watched the video they're responding to and aren't even remotely ashamed to admit it. Their goal is simply to contradict, dismiss, sneer, demoralize, and then move on to the next target. You don't need to be a psychiatrist to recognize that many of these people are carrying around a great deal of personal frustration, resentment, or insecurity, which kind of manifests itself through this shotgun-like, instantly escalating hostility, towards just like strangers on the internet. So what we're going to do today is look at the different kinds of comments I've been getting, and especially focusing on the comments that challenge the position of the Beyond Left and Right channel regarding the left-right political paradigm. We're going to examine them one by one, not to mock people, but to see whether they actually fit together into a coherent picture. Because I think when we place these different arguments side by side, they end up reinforcing the central thesis of this channel. In other words, what I'm saying is that the arguments presented in the comments themselves provide some of the strongest demonstrations that the left-right paradigm is far less coherent than most people realize at face value. Like I say, this video is already going to get very long. So when I'm going to look at a section of the comments replying to this channel's current flagship video, which I titled "Left and Right Are Political Myths." FYI, there is a corresponding Substack article available if you're interested in reading further. The link's in the description of that video. Now, unsurprisingly, this video received fewer views than the FD Signifier and Bad Empanada drama videos, and that's simply the reality of YouTube. Personality conflicts, online drama, ongoing controversies will always attract larger audiences than an hour-long discussion about political theory. Human nature is what it is.
It is what it is.
So in general, essay work is obviously going to attract less attention than drama, but the attention that it does attract tends to be of higher quality in terms of serious political engagement, and we can see that reflected in the comments. Sorry, I keep drinking because I've got a dry voice. So while the raw viewing numbers were lower, the people who did watch it, that particular video, tended to engage with it much more seriously. Rather than people simply picking a side in a personality conflict, many of the commenters are attempting to grapple with the central argument itself. They're trying to define what the left is, what the right is, whether the spectrum still works, and whether there are better ways of understanding political reality. And when you see people behaving like this, it's a really commendable thing to see. There's a fashionable tendency these days to dismiss political discussion on the YouTube as though it exists in some completely separate universe from real-world activism and political disagreement. I think that's a load of nonsense, and it's another argument-avoiding thing I've seen political YouTubers use to attack each other with. Like, yeah, you're not doing activism because you're on YouTube. Obviously, watching YouTube videos is not a substitute for political action, but ideas and our political groundings matter. The way people understand the world shapes how they act within it. So the internet, and shockingly even YouTube, can be a powerful tool for spreading ideas, building communities, and challenging assumptions. The fact that it is often used poorly or misused doesn't mean that it can't be used at all. For a channel of this size, 228 subscribers right now, I think the engagement on this particular video that we're going to look at is quite remarkable. At the time of recording, it has, let's just see, it has 356 views, and I did it 3 weeks ago. 356 views 3 weeks ago, and it has 38 comments, including my replies. That might not sound like much compared to larger channels, but for a channel with just over 200 subscribers, that's a significant amount of engagement. And more importantly, many of these comments are substantive. It's not just like what you usually see on a YouTube channel, like just trash. It's quite detailed stuff, which I feel very fortunate for having. People are writing paragraphs, they're presenting counter arguments, they're challenging assumptions and defending their positions. And that's exactly the kind of discussion I hope this channel would encourage when I started the Beyond Left and Right project. So let's start there, because this video produced some of the most interesting criticisms of the Beyond Left and Right positions so far. And there's a nice comment we can start with here. Look at this. This is a phenomenally relevant video and deserves a lot more attention than it's getting. Thanks for your comment and support. It's much appreciated. That's what I wrote. So thank you for that, Automaton. I'm really thankful for that. When you do give me those kinds of comments, it just makes me feel very motivated. I appreciate it. This guy is obviously an example of the first type of commenter. I've been getting a lot of these types of comments on the other videos featuring FD Signifier because those views are much higher. They go into the thousands. And specifically, the comments are kind of saying things like they're surprised that there's some serious engagement rather than just more drama slop. I was worried that as I entered that drama, which is exactly what I did, in whatever tiny capacity it was, that I would do myself a disservice. But actually, I'm really happy with how it turned out, because it evolved as a perfect case study around one of the things I was arguing about. And that was how figures on the mainstream left effectively gatekeep truly radical positions and slow them down long enough for those in power to commit their crimes. And then post facto, adopting those same positions at a time when it's not a particularly radical thing to espouse. And that whole cycle happened within like 6 weeks. And then it happened within 6 weeks in total. And then I kind of like jumped on it within 2 weeks. So then like that whole month of me making those videos, or whatever weeks of me making those videos, the whole thing kind of played out, which I just think is very fortunate, because it was a great example. And it made me realize that, I was worried about getting involved in it. But if you get involved in these things in the right way, they can become very powerful tools of demonstrating certain processes. Just one quick tangent before we go into the comments, continue with the comments. The only thing I regret about that whole thing was that I didn't include a rebuttal that Deculturation made on the I Mix What I Like stream against Little Bill, his Jews are a marginalized group argument, which he did, which Deculturation did do after bringing up Bad Empanada. After Little Bill made that statement about Jews being marginalized, that Jared Bowl guy and Deculturation were visibly kind of shocked about it, which is, the correct response. But then Deculturation immediately went into Bad Empanada, and then I listened to it for a bit, and I must have tuned out. After that, he did rebut Little Bill, and he did make some really good points. I spoke with Deculturation today via the comments, and we've come to some productive understanding, and I came away from that interaction with him having more respect for him. I don't completely agree with his style, especially like the racialized language, but I do hope he continues what he's doing in terms of some of his hot takes, which I saw today. I saw more of his channel today. He linked me some things, and I looked at them, and they were quite good. I was quite impressed with what he was saying. But again, this is all about challenging our positions. The commenters who are commenting on me challenging my positions. And especially with Deculturation, I just want to hold my hands up and say, I was wrong for bundling him in with FD Signifier, because he really did have some great criticisms of Zionism and Jewish privilege, and he did challenge Little Bill with in that stream. But unfortunately, it was hidden behind a smokescreen of noise. So sorry again, mate. And I wish you the very best with your channel as it approaches 10,000 subscribers. So good luck with that. And, he was very courteous. We did have some disagreements today in our conversation, and it kind of got heated and a bit insulting, but that died down. And then I said some positive things to him, and then he was nice towards me. And I'm glad that it worked out that way. I'm glad it didn't end up in two people burning bridges with each other, and something constructive came out of it. And when that happens, we all benefit. Okay, then, so back to the video. That's my tangent over. Next comment. Okay. Chalokoi 2 weeks ago. I'm going to read it. Let me just take a quick sip of tea. By the way, I need to tell you something. I'm not a smoker, but I'm living in a place that has got very, 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 very bad air pollution. And it's a recurring problem I've had with the places I've been living, and it really has an effect on my voice. So apologies for that. But I'm going to be moving somewhere in a few weeks, and I think it's going to be outside the city. Well, on the outskirts of the city, and there's a lot of trees, and I think it'll probably have an effect on my voice. So let's see. One more sip. So, Chalokoi. Okay, I just commented on your previous video. The first thing that jumped out to me is that you are calling out these models as overly simplified. And I have to say that, of course it is. All of the models envisioned are inherently reductive. You noted that in your last video that the left in the comments is all over the place with different ideas of what the left is. But that was deemed a flaw rather than a discussion that encompasses natural in-group variation that us on the left debate furiously with each other about, which is a feature and not a bug of how the far left chose to conduct ourselves. Big, however, no anarchist, communist, syndicalist, or left libertarian I have ever talked to agrees with the concept, or at least within how we use the terms left and right in a group, regardless of how a model attempts to display it, that any pro-capitalist is a leftist because fundamentally their concepts are ones that include, at best, only reform of a capitalist system to better serve its system, yet remain capitalist. Yes, capitalists have been both co-opting and mislabeling themselves as leftists, but that is their own confusion based on common use of the word left in the UK, US, Oz, Canada, and New Zealand. Societies that purged anti-capitalists in the past and so only have weak or fledgling groups representing traditional leftism. But that is their one-sided confusion. And yes, of course, we very much push back against them using our terminology when the ideological basis they are coming from differs foundationally than our own in being functionally in support of capitalism and any of the trappings ideologically linked to it, lest anyone be misled. I responded with interesting posts. This is the second time today I read the argument that the left right divide is capitalism versus anti-capitalism. I'll address this in a future video. I really appreciate the time you took to write this out. Thanks. Right, wait a minute. Okay, that's better. Right, so this is the first comment that challenges the position of the video. Before I respond to it directly, I just want to say this is exactly the kind of comment I appreciate. It's thoughtful, it's detailed, it's written in good faith, and it's exactly attempting to engage with the argument rather than simply dismiss it. Even though I strongly disagree with the conclusion, this is precisely the kind of discussion I hope this channel would generate. So I just want to say thank you so much, Chalokoi, for your contribution. On the subject of models, the fact that all models are reductive is precisely why they must be scrutinized. A model that reduces reality too far ceases to be useful as a model and becomes a distortion of reality. And that's precisely what we have seen when we encounter so many problems with the left-right political axis. Now, the essence of the argument being made here is that the disagreement we see within the left isn't actually a problem at all. According to this argument, what I'm identifying as a flaw is actually a feature. The fact that anarchists, communists, syndicalists, left libertarians, and other tendencies disagree with one another is supposedly evidence of a healthy political tradition rather than evidence of a broken category. At first glance, that sounds perfectly reasonable. Every political movement contains internal disagreements. Conservatives disagree with one another, liberals disagree with one another, religious people disagree with one another. Complete disagreement would probably be a sign that something had gone very wrong. However, I think that this argument misses the actual criticism being made. Let me just zoom in case you can't see it properly. Just double check. Hope you can see it better there. That's enough. My criticism is not that people on the left disagree with one another. My criticism is that many of these disagreements are disagreements about what the left itself fundamentally is. And these are two very different things. So as an example, if two Christians disagree about taxation, immigration policy, or foreign affairs, they still broadly agree on what Christianity is. Likewise, if two economists disagree about interest rates, they still broadly agree on what economics is. What we're seeing in these discussions is something deeper. We are seeing people who cannot even agree on the defining characteristics of the category they're defending. Some of the comments tell me that the left-right is between capitalism and anti-capitalism. Others tell me that the left-right distinction is between anti-authoritarianism and authoritarianism. So left on the anti-side and authoritarianism on the right side. Others tell me that the left is fundamentally about class. And a lot of the time I just get told that I've simply confused liberals with leftists, which isn't really an argument. Others tell me there is no meaningful left anymore because liberalism has displaced it. So these are not minor internal disagreements. These are competing definitions of the category itself. Do you see what I'm getting at here? So then there's the second part of this argument, which is the claim that no serious anarchist, communist, syndicalist, or left libertarian would ever consider a supporter of capitalism to be genuinely left-wing. Therefore, according to this argument, the defining feature of the left is opposition to capitalism. So again, it's one of the aspects I just mentioned. Now, this is actually a much stronger argument than many of the others I've encountered because it at least attempts to provide a clear definition. It gives us a dividing line. You're either anti-capitalist, which means you're a leftist, or you're not, and that means you're on the right. The problem is that once we accept that definition, a whole new set of difficulties instantly emerges. If anti-capitalism is the defining feature of the left, then Marxists are left-wing, anarchists are left-wing, Leninists are left-wing, Trotskyists are left-wing, Maoists are left-wing, Democratic Socialists are left-wing, and that last one can be debated, right? But many of these groups spent more time attacking one another than they ever did attacking capitalism. Marx and Bakunin both opposed capitalism, yet they fundamentally disagreed about authority, organization, and the role of the state. Leninists and anarchists both opposed capitalism, yet they often regarded one another as enemies. Trotskyists and Stalinists both opposed capitalism, yet they viewed one another as traitors. So the obvious question becomes, what exactly is this category explaining then? Because if the category is so broad that it contains movements with radically different views regarding authority, democracy, nationalism, freedom, state power, political organization, that's what all of these things are bundling in, remember, because we're tying it down to capitalism, anti-capitalism. Then anti-capitalism alone is not telling us very much. It's not useful at all. Do you see what I'm getting at? Where you're saying that, oh, actually, left-right is capitalism, anti-capitalism, well, then actually we should really be saying that to begin with. But if that's what you're anchoring at, the problem is that you're bundling all of these different aspects. You're bundling authoritarianism. You're bundling nationalism. You're bundling all kinds of issues on the same spectrum, and the problem hasn't changed at all. What I would argue is that anti-capitalism describes one political dimension. An important dimension, certainly, but one dimension among many. The problem begins when we attempt to elevate that single dimension into a master key that explains all of political reality. It starts breaking down. That kind of reduction is where the left-right framework repeatedly breaks down, yeah? So lumping, just a sec, let me get another drink. Lumping these groups together does absolutely nothing, because historically when we have seen one of these groups take power, and you know where I'm getting at here, they immediately turn on the others and literally eradicate them. That's not a coherent way of useful political grouping. In fact, I would argue that we've stumbled into an even deeper problem. Because throughout this discussion, the term capitalism is being treated as though it is completely self-evident. We're told that the left is anti-capitalist and that this provides a clear dividing line. But before we can determine whether that definition is useful, we first need to answer a more fundamental question. Guess what that is? What is capitalism? Now, at first, this appears straightforward. Traditionally, capitalism is described as a system in which the means of production are privately owned and economic activity is organized primarily through markets, Simple enough, yeah? The problem is that when people began comparing this theoretical model to actual societies, it broke down. So take the Soviet Union, for example. Marxists spent decades arguing over whether the Soviet Union represented socialism, a worker state, bureaucratic collectivism, or something else entirely. Then the term state capitalism emerged precisely because many critics observed that although private capitalists had largely disappeared, workers still did not meaningfully control production. The state had effectively become the dominant economic actor. A similar debate emerged around China. Is modern China socialist? Is it capitalist? Is it state capitalist? Is it a hybrid system? Depending on who you ask, you will receive completely different answers. And then we have the term, quote unquote, actually existing socialism, which emerged because many socialists recognized that the societies claiming to be socialist often looked very different from the theories found in books. The phrase was essentially an admission that there was a massive chasm between socialism as an ideal model and socialism as it actually existed in the real world. Interestingly, a similar process happened with capitalism. People increasingly speak about, quote unquote, actually existing capitalism because the economic systems around us often look very different from the simplified models presented by both supporters and critics of capitalism. Rather than countless small firms competing freely in open markets, we see enormous corporations, state intervention, subsidies, central banks, regulations, monopolies, lobbying networks, in other words, complex relationships between political and economic power that can't simply be reduced to this slogan, quote unquote, capitalism. As a result, new terms constantly emerge to patch the gaps between theory and reality. But the big problem is that that idea is never faced head on. So there's always a massive differential. And again, as I said in the previous video, often the damage is done before people are willing to come to terms with the obvious holes in the theory. So despite being warned at the time by a drowned out yet perceptive minority, it just gets suppressed and suppressed and suppressed. And then like after the fact, people start admitting it. So yeah, we hear about financial capitalism, industrial capitalism, monopoly capitalism, crony capitalism, surveillance capitalism. We've got the, neo-feudalistic. We've also got state capitalism. Do you notice what's happening? The closer we examine the concept, the more qualifiers we have to add. Every time reality refuses to fit neatly into the reductive model, another adjective gets attached to the word capitalism in order to explain the discrepancy. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that capitalism is a useless concept, but it does mean that the category is far less central and stable than people often assume. And that creates a problem for the argument we're discussing. If the defining feature of the left is opposition to capitalism, but capitalism itself is a highly contested concept with multiple competing definitions, then the definition of the left becomes unstable as well. We're no longer standing on solid ground. We're standing on top of another disputed category. It's like a house built on mud bricks, but the bricks weren't allowed to dry properly, so they just like melt and deform until the collapse becomes impossible to ignore. And we saw this process many times in the modern period. In other words, before we can answer the question, what is the left, we're forced to answer another question first because our foundational assumptions, which we built upon, were so weak because they weren't scrutinized properly. And by the way, notice what's happened here. We started with the claim that the left is easy to define because it's anti-capitalist. 5 minutes later, we're having a philosophical argument about what capitalism even means. And that should tell you something. These categories have always been weak. They dissolve in real time the moment we apply the slightest bit of scrutiny. And that's no accident. But that's a video for another time. We're getting deeper into the rabbit hole of political reality. Okay, let's move on to the next comment. Where is it? I'm curious about your writing process. I assume you have some post-secondary education. How do you do research? Yes, I talked about that. Yeah, I studied physics. My first degree was in physics. Yeah, I do this thing. I'm a perfectionist, and I've got this problem where, like, a lot of this stuff I've been baking for many years, and I never kind of get satisfied with something. But then sometimes I just have to force myself to release something because I waste so much time. Um, but I don't know if you guys are one of these people. I just tend to reread what I've written again and again, and then it just becomes iterative. But then when it starts getting, I kind of get an idea of how many pages approaches like that 1 hour mark. And I think the other week I did a video and it was like an hour and a half long. But I try to like stop it at about an hour because it just becomes the editing itself. I'm not very like good at that, and the editing that it just takes me so much time. Okay, this one. Let's have a look. I solved racism 5 days ago. Okay. I like this. I like the way this guy talks. Solid video, and some of your observations about tribalism and performative politics are fair. But I think the core thesis has a major blind spot. If the left-right spectrum is just a myth or outdated framework, then what actually structures politics? Yeah, I love the way these people write. Some of these people, they're just so good. I really appreciate the way this guy's writing. If you compare this guy to some of the other people later, bloody hell, the difference is like night and day. You criticize how both sides show authoritarian tendencies. But isn't the deeper driver class power and material interest rather than just tribalism? Why do certain policies consistently benefit the same economic class regardless of whether the government calls itself left or right? Why do both left-leaning and right-leaning governments so often protect banks, corporations, and endless wars while the working classes lose ground? Oh, so dry. If the spectrum is meaningless, why does capital always seem to win under both liberal and conservative administrations? Feels like dissolving left-right into everyone is tribal risks sliding into a political nihilism instead of sharpening class analysis. The real divide isn't just cultural, it's between those who own the means of production and those who don't. Curious how you'd respond to a more materialist framing. What do you think? What a great comment. Like, what an absolutely great comment. Really, isn't it a shame that there aren't more people like this, like just talking with each other? How did I respond? What a great comment. Oh, there we go. The first thing I'd say is that rejecting the left-right spectrum doesn't automatically imply political nihilism. It only implies that political reality is more complex than a single linear framework can capture. One of the problems is that I'm not immediately showing the alternative. There is an alternative that I've baked up. I think my argument would be much stronger if I showed the alternative because I can actually contrast them. The thing is, I don't want to, for a variety of reasons, I don't want to show the alternative straight away. I want to keep deconstructing, encountering objections to that and counter arguments, then entering into dialogue and then refining. And then at some point in the future, probably a matter of months, if not weeks, I will show the alternative or an alternative. And then we can have a whole conversation about that. Right. Continuing with my comment, I also don't disagree about that class, capital labor, economic interests and institutional power are important. My question is why those should be treated as the sole organizing principle of politics, any more than culture, authority, religion, identity, nationalism, technology, or any number of forces. The examples you've given are actually the very reason why I started questioning, I miswrote there, why I started questioning the spectrum in the first place. The examples you've given are exactly why the spectrum breaks down. If supposedly opposing left-wing and right-wing governments repeatedly converge on banking policy, foreign policy, corporate interests and military intervention, then that itself raises, I can't remember why I wrote this. That itself demonstrates, this is probably me writing on the bloody phone. That itself demonstrates the utter weakness of the explanatory power of the spectrum, pardon me. I don't think the failure of one single access framework necessarily means we should replace it with another. That's where a lot of the future content on this channel is headed. So I Solve Racism responds with, I agree political reality is more complex than a single axis, no serious materialist claims otherwise. But here's the key distinction. Class, capital, and economic interests form the base that ultimately shapes and limits the other forces you mentioned. culture, religion, identity, nationalism, etc. Those aren't separate. Those aren't separate equals. They're largely superstructural expressions of the underlying material conditions of class struggle. History shows us clearly governments across the left-right spectrum consistently protect banks, corporations, and imperial power because they serve the same ruling class. Cultural/religious differences exist, but they rarely override the logic of capital accumulation. That's why left/right administrations in the West have converged so strongly on neoliberal economics and militarism for decades. Just that point quickly, I would say that Israel and the religious insanity around Israel is a big debunker of that argument. But moving on, dissolving the spectrum into pure complexity risks political nihilism. We can acknowledge nuance while still recognizing that class power remains the primary contradiction. The real question isn't whether other forces matter, it's why capital keeps winning, regardless of the cultural packaging. Curious how you'd address that structural convergence. This guy is like a serious thinker. And you know, when you encounter these people, it's like a breath of fresh air. I want to tell you something really quickly. I'm going to go on a tangent, right? What this guy reminds me of. I'm working in a academic institution at the moment, and like an elite institution, but I'm leaving it in a matter of weeks, and I'm going to go back into university directly to do some research. But where I'm working, I kind of view it as an anti-academic area, and it's difficult to explain. I don't want to reveal too much, but put it this way: I do teaching, but I also work in an office, and there's loads of stuff involved in the job. Loads of writing and proofreading and all this kind of stuff. But anyway, anyone who's worked in an office knows this. There are just dickheads in offices, and there are people who just like are know-it-alls, and they just think they have all the answers, and they can't admit any kind of weakness, that they have gaps in their knowledge or anything like that. And it kind of comes from like a position of I think it comes from a position of insecurity. And like they'll make something up before they'll just tell you something. Anyway, I was having lunch with by the way, I don't live in England anymore. I live in another country. I live on Europe proper, but I don't live in the European Union. And so I was having lunch with like a native person and an English colleague. I work with other people from Britain, America, Australia, places like that. Anyway, another British colleague came and sat with us, and my driver's license has expired, and I need to renew it. Now, either I sometimes you can do stuff from another country, and you can do it through the consulate or the embassy, but other times it's just easier to just go back to England and just get it done there. Like when I renewed my passport, I went back, and it was like the easiest process. And especially when you're living in like kind of like what we're saying, like third world countries, like the bureaucracy is just unbelievable and it can be very frustrating. But anyway, I just mentioned, I said, he mentioned something about his driver's license, and I said, did you renew it when you were here? And I said, how did you go about renewing it? And the guy just, he was about to say something, and he went, and then he stopped himself, and he kind of looked puzzled, and he said, you know what? I don't know. I forgot. And that phrase, I don't know, it hit me like a boulder. And the reason is because it's so refreshing. I asked him a question, and he just said to me, I don't know. And what that does is it saves me time. Like, he hasn't made something up and said a load of bullshit, and like he's forgotten the process, so he's just going to lie, which then wastes my time. He says, I don't know. And the reason why that hit me like a boulder is because where I'm working, it's kind of like a very high intensity, high stressful environment. And I think people feel under pressure. And what that does is when they feel under pressure and insecure, they kind of have these defense mechanisms, and they try and like pretend like they know what they're talking about when they clearly don't know what they're talking about. And the phrase, I don't know, is like a sign of weakness. And that's how they see it. And they feel like they have to have an opinion on everything. They feel like they have to, like they're an expert on every single thing. And when you're around those people in close quarters day after day, it can become very exhausting, especially if like they're talking about stuff that maybe you know more than they do, but you just don't want to argue with them because it's a different environment, let's say, than an online environment. And I said to that, he left us, and my colleague, who is a national of the country that we're living in, She works in another department, and in her department, it's like fucking, it's like the psychology department. And the irony is that the people in the psychology department, a lot of them are just fucking insane. We will make this joke that people go into psychology not because, like, you know, for the right reasons, because basically they're trying to fix their own like psychological unhingedness. Anyway, now her department's like even worse than my department, and we kind of have these conversations about like the difficult people that sometimes we have to work with about these specific issues of like having to always win over in a meeting, or, you know, all this kind of stuff. And I just said to her, I said, you know, what he said to me hit me like a boulder in the face, because it's so refreshing to hear somebody utter the words, I don't know. I don't know is the beginning of wisdom. I don't know. And why it gets back to me, this I solved racism thing, it's just, I look at the way he's engaging. And you'll see, compared to the last person I'm going to cover, you'll see the difference. Like, he's really given me a really serious argument. He's put a lot of thought into it. And at the end of it, what's he said? Look, curious how you'd address that structural convergence. So let's see what I said. It's pretty easy to address this because it's a classic Marxist reductionist fallacy. So my problem with this is, like, I don't think all of these things can bubble out of class. If no serious materialist believes political reality can be reduced to a single axis, then there mustn't be many serious materialists, because it's very easy demonstrable that the vast majority of people are operating via the left-right axis, including those who qualify it with terms like materialist. Like, the reason I've said that is I really don't like this adjective materialist. I kind of like, I take issue with it because I feel like it's overused, and I feel like you can say a complete sentence without even using material. And maybe I'll do a video about that in the future. To say that culture, religion, identity, nationalism, and etc. are ultimately shaped and limited by class is still a single reductionist organizing principle, and a very simplistic one at that. We've just replaced class instead of left-right. Now, this isn't my argument, by the way. This is a very long-established, this is a very long-established criticism of Marxism. And it's something I think is very well-rooted. The problem is that once class is elevated to the status of the primary contradiction, every other phenomenon becomes subordinate to it by definition. Culture becomes class, religion becomes class, nationalism becomes class, identity becomes class, and so on. At this point, we're no longer analysing political reality. We're filtering political reality through a framework that has already decided in advance what the most important answer is. And we're back to the pseudoscientific nature of Marxism, already deciding on the conclusion no matter what the outcome is. Again, a lot of people have pushed back on me using this term pseudoscientific. I'll do a specific video on it in the future. But the reason I'm saying that is because it decides on the conclusion no matter what the outcome is. And I'll provide some really strong case examples. And I'll go into like Popperian criticisms of Marxism that are quite strong. I'll do that in the future. Again, it's easy demonstrable that in the 150 odd years since Marx wrote, I think actually it's more than 150 years, but in general it's that. The idea that class is the basis of these different dynamics has been thoroughly refuted. It's not always about class, even though class itself can be an important factor. Look, I'm not dismissing class. What I'm definitely saying is that if you actually try and analyze everything through like this class analysis, you'll see some serious issues that just don't make any sense. And again, I'll probably include that in the Marxist video as well. Again, the irony is that many of the examples we're talking about, left-wing and right-wing governments converging on banks, corporations, foreign policy, and military intervention, are amongst the strongest arguments against the explanatory power of such simplistic reductionist thinking in the first place. They don't demonstrate that class explains everything. They demonstrate that political reality is far more complicated than the framework being used to describe it. So again, the other guy was talking about capitalism, anti-capitalism. Now we're talking about class. And by the way, those two things aren't the same thing. If people want to say, oh, well, actually, they're both talking about the same thing, they're not. And again, yeah, I was really taken aback by this guy. I really liked the way he was talking. I really like your genuine curiosity regarding this. I feel like I've been quite lucky with the quality of people who've been commenting on my channel recently, because it's exactly what I was trying to foster when embarking upon this project. I will be releasing another article and video talking through these different dynamics in much greater detail, so stay tuned for more. Yeah, that guy, really nice. People like I Solve Racism and the other guy, the Chalasy guy, or Chaliki, they're clearly not precious about the arguments themselves. Like, they're obviously, the way I see these people, they're obviously open to changing their position if the right information presents itself. It's clearly not glued to their identity because they're not taking anything personally, and that's the way it should be. It's a high level of sophisticated engagement. We're engaging with the arguments they have presented for us to stress test the current position. Just as, look, the argument that I'm presenting about the class reductionism and not, you can't tie everything to glass, I didn't invent that. I'm not some kind of amazing, like, the genius who discovered it. That's quite a well-established argument. I'm running out of water here. I don't want to pause the video and like restart. Okay, so I just want to refresh the argument itself. There it is. I hope you guys can see it. There's his original argument. I hope you can see this. Like, so what's interesting about this particular argument? Again, like the previous one, it's not discussing capitalism as a central theme. It's turned it to class. And again, despite the fact that people often treat them as interchangeable, they are not the same thing and should not be casually conflated. So yeah, the previous guy said left-right was opposition to capitalism. This guy's making a different claim. And what's interesting is that, look, we've already moved the goalposts. So it's no longer anti-capitalism. Capitalism is the defining feature of the left. This person's saying something completely different. Don't you think that if the left-right political spectrum made more sense, that everyone would be giving me the same answer? And they'd be like, Guy, you don't understand politics enough. You don't understand this theory enough. Here what it is. And I could get 20 people telling me the same thing, but they're not. They're all saying different things. So can you see how this argument hasn't been thoroughly examined yet until we've started doing it together as a group? Right. So again, like before somebody immediately objects that class and capitalism are inseparable, let me clarify what I mean. The existence of classes does not automatically prove the Marxist theory of class, nor does it demonstrate that people consistently organize themselves according to their economic relationship to the means of production. Those are additional claims which require additional evidence. In fact, and again, this is not my argument. This is an old argument. It's a well-established argument. One of the major problems facing Marxist theory over the last, 150 years is that people repeatedly refuse to behave in a way that theory predicts. Workers have repeatedly identified themselves as Christians, Muslims, Germans, Russians, Americans, black, white, nationalist, liberal, conservative, monarchist, Republican, and countless other things before identifying themselves primarily as workers. That is not an occasional anomaly. There's been plenty of research into this. It's one of the most persistent features of human history. If we want to actually engage with the historical reality rather than like Marxist fairy tales, capitalists do not consistently organize themselves as capitalists either. Religious identities, national identities, ethnic identities, civilizational identities, and countless other forms of social organization repeatedly override what Marxist theory predicts should be the people's primary class interests. You cannot look at Israel-Palestine just through kind of like economic interests because it makes no economic sense. It's burning tons of money when that money could have been better spent elsewhere, which makes much more sense. And again, it's not a minor exception to the theory. It's one of the central reasons why Marxist predictions have consistently failed when confronted with real historical developments. And Marxists admit this, yeah? And the response has always been to backtrack, make excuses. So it's not necessarily to deny that the theories failed. They kind of admit that the predictions have failed, but they'll backtrack and make excuses, and this wasn't taken into account. And that's why I had this conversation with somebody about Professor Richard Wolff. That's why figures like him, get accused of not really being Marxist by online commenters who aren't really familiar with Marxist academics. Professor Richard Wolff is not an exception in Marxist academia. He's the rule. He's literally doing what Marxists have been doing for well over a century, and that's trying to patch over a fundamentally broken theory. And what they'll do is they'll routinely just like borrow stuff and just take shit from anarchism. That's quite a common thing. That's not just new with Richard Wolff. I know that's a common criticism of him. I will do a video of him in the future. So yeah, I don't think any serious people would deny that class matters. Have I even encountered a right-wing person who said it? I don't think I've ever encountered a person who said class doesn't matter. Maybe there are. Somebody tell me. The claim that I'm making, or the claim that this person's making that I'm refuting. Look, the claim is that class occupies a privileged position above all other explanatory categories, and it's the foundation upon which everything else rests. And this is why I think there's a big disagreement here. My objection to the left-right spectrum is not that it identifies something completely fictional. Political tribes exist, economic tribes exist, social classes exist. My objection is that political reality is repeatedly reduced to a single organizing principle, which is then elevated above all others. And then you've got these groupings that just don't make any sense because they're tied in the wrong way. The tie that ties them together is wrong. The traditional left-right spectrum attempted to do this through a single political axis. That's the tie. The materialist framework attempts to do something very similar through class. What strikes me is whenever this argument is presented, culture, religion, nationalism, civilization, ethnicity, identity, and countless other factors are acknowledged only to be quietly subordinated to class. They are granted importance up to a point, but ultimately they are treated as secondary phenomena. They become expressions of a deeper material relationships. And the problem is that this conclusion is often assumed rather than demonstrated. So why should culture be subordinate to class? Why should religion be subordinate to class? Religion especially, look at how people behaved in religion. People will die because of religion. Why should nationalism be subordinate to class? Again, nationalism is something very powerful, especially within the last 150 years. Why should civilization be subordinate to class? These aren't just rhetorical questions. They're genuine fundamental questions if you're going to put class as the foundation of everything. Because once we step outside the framework itself, the answer becomes far less obvious than many people assume. Human beings have repeatedly organized themselves around religion, ethnicity, nationality, their language, culture, their perceived civilization. Human beings have fought wars over these things. They've built states around these things. They have sacrificed their own lives, not just for religion, for nationalism. Sometimes economic interests played a major role in those developments. Sometimes they played a secondary role. Sometimes they have play a very little role at all. So the issue is not that class analysis explains nothing. Class analysis can be very useful. The issue is that class analysis is frequently expected to explain everything. And it's the same problem as the left-right spectrum. At that point, we begin encountering exactly the same problem we encountered earlier with anti-capitalism. One explanatory category gradually expands until it becomes the master key for interpreting all political and historical phenomena. Culture becomes class, religion becomes class, nationalism becomes class, identity becomes class. Every road eventually leads back to the same destination. To me, that is not fundamentally different from the problem we encounter with the left-right spectrum. Again, we've simply replaced one reductionist framework with another. And what I find particularly interesting is that this comment appears immediately after another commenter argued that anti-capitalism is a defining feature of the left. So can you see what's happening here? There's no consistency. If it was that strong, there would be consistency. I would be getting schooled by 20 different people on the same thing. right? Again, I'm talking about pseudoscience. If somebody says something that's incorrect about physics, you're not going to get 20 different answers. You're going to get like consistent answers. And again, we can slide the scale of how close to science we're talking about. But look, there needs to be some kind of coherence, guys. Do you get what I'm saying here? The more comments we see, the more this is going to be apparent. And if you just go into my videos, just expand all the comments, just read what people are saying, try and find some coherence. And you might bundle a few people, or these 3 people, 5 people are talking about anti-capitalism. These people are talking about this. These people are talking about authoritarianism, and especially authoritarianism. If you've got a group of people talking about authoritarianism on one side, and then you've got another group of people talking about something else, you can't marry those things up. You really can't. So every commenter is convinced. Every commenter who disagrees with me, by the way, like most people on the channel are agreeing with me. I mean, I know that if you're listening to this, you probably agree with me. But you need to, this is something that we need to take into account when we're discussing with these people. We need to help them take a step back and look at and see the forest, basically. And if this channel alone, I'm really happy with what's happened with this channel, because this channel alone has kind of shown what's going on. Just take a step back, open the left versus right video, open the FD signifier videos. Maybe the FD signifier videos aren't so helpful, but as we open more, as we have more left and right videos, and then you just open those videos and look at the comments, you see there's a complete incoherence, and that incoherence speaks volumes. And I think these guys, I think I'm getting to them. I think because they're quite thoughtful people, I think they do see my point. I think they can see it. I think they're starting to see it now. Right, guys, I need to refill my glass. I'm going to stop the recording and then restart it just a sec. Right, I've made 2 cups of tea. 2 hot cups of tea. That should keep me to the end of the video. Why did I tell you that I was leaving and not just edit it out? Well, because if I lost where I was, it would make sense. While I went away, I thought about something, and I thought I'll let you know as a tangent. I hope you appreciate these tangents and you don't get annoyed by them. So yeah, by the way, I think you can see it says YouTube Romania. I'm not in Romania. That's just my VPN. But yeah, I don't live in England, and I like the country I live in. I like the beautiful nature. I'm very integrated with the population. I can speak the local language. But it can in many ways be a capitalist nightmare. And one thing I always think about living here is that, these fucking right-wing, free market capitalists and all these idiots, sometimes they would just benefit from living in a country where you see a lack of regulations, and you just see how many problems it creates. So I'll give you an example. I don't just have one job. I've got a couple of jobs, and one of my jobs is I travel around the city, this city that I live in, and I was going to this neighborhood for the first time. It's actually it's a predominantly Jewish neighborhood. Lots of Jews living there. What's that FD signifier? Bad and Panada Zog. Zog debacle. But anyway, this is a very affluent Jewish neighborhood, right? It's maybe 40-50% Jewish, which is quite high. And this is an argument against capitalism and against those kinds of free market people, because when you live in a society that doesn't have regulations, doesn't have proper regulations, even if you're a rich person, you still suffer. So what do I mean? So it was this is maybe about, I can't remember, maybe a year or 2 ago. First time I'm just getting my bearings with this new place. I need to go and see a client. And I walk past like a load of construction. And in this country, there's no proper zoning, and you see it everywhere. They just don't zone properly. And when you don't zone shit, everything's just fucking shit. It's really bad. So I'll give you an example. So I was walking through this really kind of residential area, and the next thing I know, it's like immediately farmland, and there's like donkeys and things like that, and then there's like cars and trucks driving past, and it's quite a dangerous situation. And it was getting late. I think it was winter time, and there was some local people. Like, so you've gone from like a urban environment to a rural environment within a few steps, and there were people, and they had these drums, and they were burning plastic in the drums. And I've seen this quite a lot in this country. And they were just burning whatever they could find. They didn't have like gas burners. There were no like social programs to deal with the situation. There's no kind of like in I remember in England, one of the reasons I left England, right? This is a funny thing, and I keep going on tangents, but hopefully it's going to make sense for you. One of the reasons I left England is because where I was living was next to a canal, and the people were burning wood burners, and that wood burner was going like into my apartment, and it was making me cough. And it was giving me this like kind of like this voice that I've got, this like kind of smoker's cracky cock. I've never smoked in my life, but I've got this kind of like cracky voice because of this. And one of the reasons I was getting sick of like a few things, that wasn't the main reason, but it was just a thing that annoyed me. And anyway, so yeah, and then I come back to years later, I come back to this city, and I'm in a large city, and I face the same problem. But anyway, I go to this neighborhood, and this is a big problem in this country. And the locals, there's some local people who are living on a farm, basically, that's kind of like right in the middle of the city. The city's just like encroaching upon it. There's no green belts. There's no kind of zoning or regulation. And they're just burning whatever they can find. And they're burning plastic. So there's an education issue there. There's a kind of like local laws issue there. And that, as you can guess what's happening, it's just billowing out this soot. And I went to the job, went to the client. And then it was like an hour and a half later, it was getting dark. And I left, and I was going to go back to get home. I needed to catch the metro. And the whole neighborhood was just swamped in this fucking mist of soot. So you had like, these houses were very rich. These are very rich people's houses, right? These are some of the richest people in this country. And this is what I'm trying to get at. Even if you're a very rich person, if you're living in a country that has no regulations, or it has bad regulations, like the regulations aren't actually regulating the right things, they're regulating the wrong things, you're going to suffer. It doesn't matter whether you're a rich person or you're a poor person. The rich people in this country, they are earning probably 5 times, 10 times like really good earners in England or America, for example. However, their purchasing power with all that money is so much less, because you've got all these infrastructural issues, you've got all these regulatory issues, and it just shows you like how everyone suffers. And I think because right now I'm talking a lot about the left, I will go back to the right. I made some videos on the right. Like, for example, the schools. I must have seen like 20 schools in this country, maybe more. And they do not have proper zoning. There's no the city planners don't zone anything. So like, what happens is there's not proper loading and unloading and parking outside the school. So in my country, in England, they do have that. And then there's issues, but like there's dedicated zoning for schools. They don't have that in this country. What do you think happens? Every morning, like clockwork, it's just bedlam, and you've got people fighting with each other, people arguing with each other. Like disputes, the people can't drop the kids off properly, the kids are late, this, that, and the other. And then what happens is the municipality or the state has to come in and bring police, literal traffic police, to fix the situation. What that does is increase costs. So instead of actually designing the infrastructure and the architecture of what you're trying to build to be fit for purpose, you don't do that. Because it's capitalism. It's the free market. It should just all like unfold the way it does, and it doesn't work like that. So then what happens is you have to get the police involved, and you end up having to spend more money. So more taxpayers' money has to be spent to solve a problem that was created due to poor lack of planning. And sometimes you just think with kind of like the right winging, don't regulate anything and this and the other. They just need to live in one of these countries for like a year, just to experience what the alternative would be like. Because a lot of them, even Americans, and America probably doesn't have the same regulations as Europe. They are just simply lucky. They've been very lucky to be insulated from a lot of problems. So they're not they just can't experience it. And that's one thing I love about traveling, is that when you travel, you get to see things outside your comfort zone. You get to see different aspects of life, and you really grow as a result of it. So anyway, back to the video. That's enough of my tangents. Right, so we discussed I Solve Racism. Really, really nice guy. I don't know the guy. Look, this is the parasocial relationship, but I like the way he talks. Okay. Are you an atheist? I don't think that's relevant to this. Here we go. Hyman Minsky. Good old Hyman Minsky. I think that's a Jewish name if you've ever heard one. Is it, Hyman? You correct us. Hyman Minsky, I really have to be appreciative of Hyman, because when the channel was 35, like 30 subscribers, Hyman was there. He was commenting on every video, rubbing me up the wrong way, making jokes. I think he's a Marxist. I don't think he likes some of my early criticisms, but you know what it is, right? I like the way he engages. Maybe this one he was a bit rougher, but I do like it when Hyman comments on my videos. It's always fun. Okay, so this video, remember what this video is. Left and right of political myths. So let me read the description. What if the political spectrum itself is the problem? In this video, I explore the instability of the modern left-right paradigm and argue that many political contradictions emerge because reality no longer fits neatly into a single ideological line. From nationalism and socialism to identity politics, tribalism, authoritarianism, political psychology, this essay examines how modern political labels increasingly fail to describe the complexity of human societies. There we go, going about the origins in the French Revolution, authoritarian convergence, tribal identity, political psychology. I love putting a bit of psychology in there. The fragmentation of modern political categories, instability of ideological labels over time, so like how it's evolved and kind of mutated historically. I think the great example of that is the Democrats and Republicans in the United States, and why political movements often become emotionally tribal than rational. So I was very pleased with myself when I finished that video. So anyway, Hyman's watched this. And to be honest, Hyman, mate, I love you, but I don't think you watched it very carefully. So Hyman, totally agree. There is absolutely no difference between Martin Luther King and Donald Trump, Karl Marx, Ben Shapiro, etc. Brilliant analysis. You got to be joking, Hyman. I am. But I hope you understood my core thesis is that political reality is too complex to be reduced to a single linear spectrum. That's the point, not that Karl Marx and Donald Trump are the same. There might be a little, in their lifetimes, there might be a little more similar than people realize, actually. So, Hyman, political reality is complex, just as history, biology, and physics are complex, but creating a consistent conceptual framework is absolutely crucial if we're not going to descend in postmodernist morass. He's very correct. The terms left and right have lost their meaning in the West because there is no left to speak of. What people mean when they refer to the left in the US is just identity politics liberalism. I mean, yeah, I can't really disagree with that. That has nothing whatsoever to do with what has been understood to be the left from the French Revolution until the fall of the Soviet Union. So I think this is where the argument fails. Try to analyze and understand current events and history without an analytic framework that takes seriously contradictions between capital and labor and imperialism seem to me doomed to fail. I like his argument. The big problem here is this. I don't know how closely he watched the video, but one of the things in the video is, look, these things are mutating through history. What did I reply with? But this is my point, Hyman. You shifted from defending the left-right framework itself into defending a specific economic analysis inside that framework. Those aren't the same things. Again, it's similar to what the other people described. Labor, capital, contradictions, imperialism, class analysis, etc. are all analytical lenses, right? Individually. The existence of those lenses does not suddenly solve the problem of trying to compress the totality of political reality into a single linear left-right spectrum. Mate, I'm not arguing something far out there. It's a pretty straightforward thesis and pretty solid in terms of defensibility. I don't think that this position is that crazy. For whatever reason, it's not being picked up by many people, but it is being picked up by people. Like, if you really go out there and look for it, many different people have independently come to this conclusion. And I do think that we're on the verge of this being picked up. not just simply due to my efforts with my fucking, 228 subscribers. I do think we're on the verge of it. As I said in the video, criticism of the left-right paradigm is actually the least controversial message of this channel. That's still my position. And I think what's happening is with my commenters is that they are agreeing with me, whether they want to give me credit or not. The ones who are kind of my biggest critics, they've softened on it. And then they're like, yeah, you're right, actually. Yeah, there are absurdities about the spectrum. And then they go on to kind of like then talk about they kind of like talk about the left of what they see as their idealized left, and then me referring back to the functional left. Oh, well, there you go. And your point and your point about there being no real left today actually reinforces the thesis rather than undermining it. If the category continuously mutates historically, and this is the part I don't think he watched the video, to the point where people are constantly arguing over what the real left even is, then the stability of the category itself becomes questionable. You can't just frame it as being from the French Revolution until the fall of the Soviet Union because it's convenient. We have to see the whole thing as it is. You can't just cut it off as the Soviet Union because it's convenient for you. And even then, even if you take the French Revolution to the Soviet Union, there are still problems with that. Big problems. The issue is not whether class analysis exists or whether economics matters. Of course they do. The issue is whether all political reality can coherently be organized into one overarching linear spectrum in the first place. Again, not controversial at all if you just pause to think about it for a moment. Here's his response. He's a good guy, Hyman. Appreciate you taking the time for such a thoughtful and articulate reply, really. Most people don't do that. Thank you, Hyman. I didn't realize you were referring to whether all political reality can coherently be organized into one overarching linear spectrum in the first place. Well, sure, I don't know if anyone would disagree with that. Can you be specific? So just before we continue, that's the issue, mate. The problem is that that's what people are doing when they're constantly throwing about these terms left and right so casually. Can you be specific? In what context does the left-right spectrum not apply? The immigration question, European nationalism, Trump and the Democrats. Not exactly sure what the problem is so long as everyone defines their terms at the outset. I mean, look, this is the kind of people that I love having on the channel. Like the way he genuinely wants, maybe he's been a bit of a prick at the start and he's been a bit silly, but he does genuinely, he's challenged me. And then if he got a stupid answer, then I can kind of get why he's being a prick, but he's challenged me and then I give him a serious answer. And then he's realized that I'm taking it seriously and he's taking it seriously. And I've got to say, like, I really do feel very, fortunate that these people have found the channel. And I haven't really seen Hyman, commenting on the recent videos. I don't know if I've just pissed him off too much because I'm always bashing Marxism. But if you're hearing this, Hyman, I miss you, mate. Anyway, no worries, Hyman, my good man. For you, anything, since we're now 2 weeks into our YouTube commenting friendship, and that alone makes you a veritable pillar of our new pioneering political community. He was here commenting like when the channel had like, I don't know, maybe 10, even less than 30 subscribers. Everything you need to know is in the bloody video. Just watch it properly, and please, no mean sarcasm next time, lest you be labelled as yet another condescending Marxist fart sniffer. But seriously, there are ways that political realities can be mapped more accurately. It's definitely not impossible. I'm releasing everything piecemeal as time goes by. Stay tuned for more. I get why people might be frustrated because, guys, I am going to release it, but it's going to be later, and I'm going to explain the reason why. But what I really appreciate is how like people are hungry for knowledge. And it's such a nice thing to see from people rather than just being tribalistic. Oh man, I thought I was being funny, not condescending. My apologies. I should work on that. Oh, bless you, Hyman. I think we get the issue here. And let's look at the next comment. Caveman anarchist. I have often gotten frustrated with people's inability to articulate what they mean by the left and right. Excellent. I think that's a lot of people, isn't it? I don't think it's just people like us who kind of like are critical of it himself. I think even people who use the terms left and right, I think everyone's kind of like frustrated by it. I mean, there are definite frustrations, and that's what obviously triggered me with this whole journey. I was taught that it's a spectrum of power concentration. Excellent point. The theory makes sense this way, though placing an entire system neatly into that framework isn't simple. Categories tend to exist like that in reality, though. We categorize in an attempt to describe reality, but reality doesn't neatly fit into our characterizations. Yeah, excellent comment. Exactly. A single access is not sufficient to describe something so complex. It's kind of like reducing someone's entire intelligence into a single integer number. It's nonsense. You know, IQ, and you know, those kinds of people who are like obsess over IQ. And what was it? What was he called? That guy, Stephen Hawking. And it's not just Hawking, because I know there's issues around regarding him, but like, you know, the kind of people who like obsess about IQ usually aren't very intelligent people. Just a second. Okay. Caveman anarchist. Yeah, it's a narrow concept that was never intended to be so broadly applied. The people who started using the phrase would have been able to define it. It was only supposed to describe whether a political system sought to consolidate power amongst a few, right, and those who sought to reduce the concentration of power, left. At the time, it was monarchy and democracy. So the lines were pretty clear. Over time, though, more vague colloquial use, the word became conflated with lists of policy positions that aren't clearly differentiated by any coherent boundaries. That's a multifaceted problem tied to the evolution of language and the changing context of culture, combined with an increasingly common apathy as to the definition of words. We just need to use our words more precisely. I couldn't agree with you more, mate. We need to understand which part of reality a word is meant to describe, that the word doesn't actually encompass reality, and sometimes you need new language to describe a concept. Absolutely. Most people just freeze when you ask what the left-right dichotomy is describing. That's true. They'll just think for a minute and be like, that's not a failure of the concept. Okay. It's just operating off assumptions instead of learning what they're talking about. Exactly, they're operating off assumptions. This is the same place where we get quantum physics woo, therapy speak, and probably a myriad of other daily frustrations. Sorry, didn't mean to write an essay. That just happened. I'm really happy that you write an essay. I'm really happy. It's not just engagement with the channel so the channel grows. Like it's all of this stuff that we're talking about is expanding our understanding, and it's training our kind of political muscles in our brains. Yeah. I don't know why it does that. Look, have you ever noticed that I think it's when I'm on my phone, I try and reply, and the way it writes it in, it kind of like writes something there. Do you see what happened there? Yeah, there's no field like politics where the terminology is so vague, and I don't think that's an accident. That's my conspiracy theorizing coming out. Thank you for your interesting and highly detailed input into the division. Definitely not an accident. Oh, he's a conspiracy theorist too, like me. Let's all put our tinfoil hats on, guys. There was an intentional effort to conflate concepts, suppress theory and appropriate ideas. The CIA admits to it. And again, you know, a few years ago, if you started talking like this, you'd be dismissed straight away. And actually, people are a bit more open to this kind of stuff. That's why people reflexively dismiss words like socialism and communism but can't define them. That's why people think anarchy just means chaos and nihilism. It's been a ruling class tactic for 10,000 years. So he's getting deep now, this guy. Suppress alternative cultures and ideas until the only option for success is the predominant system. Then stigmatize the old ideas. Hunter-gatherers are savages. Paganism is devil worship. A system of progress is defined as perpetual growth is the only viable option. It's all the same. The Romans did it to the Gauls. The English did it to the Irish. The modern system has done it almost everywhere. So he's doing quite an expansive commentary there. Exactly this, controlling the narrative. Luckily, we are now at a time in history where we can expect it significantly. This is me. I'm talking about like the internet and the kind of access we have. Yeah, there's still control, but we do have like really new things that we can take advantage of. Though concerned, I remain hopeful. Me too, mate. What is life worth unless we have a noble cause to work towards? I believe it's possible, and I think together we can succeed in our lifetime. There's my bit of cheese, guys. So the caveman anarchist presents a completely different response to the problem. Unlike some of the previous commenters, he isn't defending anti-capitalism as the defining feature of the left, nor is he arguing that class provides the master key to political reality. Instead, he's making another kind of claim. His argument is that the left-right spectrum itself isn't necessarily broken, rather people have forgotten what it originally meant. In a matter of terms. According to his interpretation, left and right were originally concerned with the concentration of power. The right sought to concentrate power in the hands of a smaller group, while the left sought to distribute power more broadly. Over time, however, the terminology became detached from its original meaning and gradually accumulated an endless collection of unrelated policy positions, cultural markers, and political identities. Now, I actually think There's a lot of truth in that observation if we go back to its history in the French Revolution. If you do search terms for left and right in the history of it and like the dichotomy on YouTube, there's many videos on it for many years, and they always start with the French Revolution. There's a big issue with this position, however. One of the recurring themes on this channel is that political language is often remarkably vague, and I agree with him on that. People use words like left, right, socialism, capitalism, democracy, freedom, authoritarianism every day. When asked to define them, many struggle to provide a coherent answer. And he said this as well. The result is that people frequently end up arguing over labels rather than discussing the underlying realities those labels are supposed to describe. Now, I agree with all of the things that he's saying in that respect. Where I would differ with Caveman Anarchist is on his conclusion. Because even if we accept his historical account completely, which I don't, I think we are still left with a fundamental problem. The moment we define the left-right spectrum as a spectrum of a power concentration, we immediately begin encountering cases that do not fit neatly into the model. So again, capitalism, anti-capitalism, class. Now we're seeing power concentration. It's another line. It's another thing we're trying to tie everything by. So let's try and examine power concentration. Should power be concentrated in the state, or should it be dispersed through markets? That's a definite issue. So how does that fit in with the left-right spectrum? The people who believe in those two opposing things. Should power be concentrated in national governments or international institutions? So now we're getting into globalism, European Union, United Nations, and nationalist tendencies, and those kinds of things. Should power be concentrated in elected representatives, or should it be dispersed through direct democracy? Like, what do we do? Do we have socialist councils? How do we organize it? Should power be concentrated in majorities or constrained through constitutional protections? Yeah? Should there be like an American-style constitution that protects certain things? Should the minorities be protected from the mob? Because, some people think democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner. Should power be concentrated in bureaucracies, courts, corporations, unions, religious institutions, or local communities? Should it be in these larger state-expanding institutions, or should it be more local and cooperative? Do you see what's happening here? The second you replace it with another single axis, and then you start examining it, it starts breaking down. Very quickly, we discover that power itself is also multidimensional. We haven't escaped the problem. We've simply overlooked it. And I'm actually, at this point, I'm curious if some of you can preempt what my solution is going to be. I think a couple of you may actually be preempting what my solution is going to be, which I'm going to release in depending on when the channel gets to 1,000 subscribers, that's when I'm going to release it, right? And this is precisely why I keep returning to the same conclusion. Political reality contains multiple competing dimensions operating simultaneously. Economic power, political power, cultural power, technological power, religious power, and social power frequently overlap, conflict, and interact with each other. But I'm not saying that we can't create some kind of coherent framework to view them. The difficulty isn't that people have forgotten the original meaning of left and right, which is what his main contention is. The difficulty is that reality itself is more complicated than the categories we inherited to describe it. And if you're getting frustrated that I'm not providing an answer, despair not, because there are ways of dealing with it, I promise you. I've been spending a lot of time thinking about this. I didn't just create the channel without preparing for it before. But those ways of dealing with it are quite different to the way we deal with it now. I'm going to continue with the deconstruction phase of this project until the channel reaches at least 1,000 subscribers. Right? I'm going to use the 1,000 subscriber mark before I start releasing the positive side of it. So at that point, I will start introducing positive alternatives to what we have now. And again, I've received comments about this. Oh, it's all well and good deconstructing this and criticizing it, but what do you have to offer? Completely reasonable question. And there will be three big aspects to that positive alternative framework, which I'm sure will generate an additional explosion in debate. So the counter solution, which I'm going to offer regarding left-right, is going to be the least controversial thing. I predict that that's going to be the least problematic thing. The other two things that come with that I will be presenting will be controversial, believe me. So I'm going to provide an alternative solution to the left-right spectrum, but I'm predicting that that won't be as controversial as the two other things that I feel like I need to also provide as well. Three big things, three big positions, okay, on three big issues. Watch this space. And there are some very important reasons as to why I want to hold off on all of this, which I'm sure the astute among you will understand why I'm doing it this way. But judging by the speed of the growth of this channel, I mean, getting to 1,000, it might be months, if not weeks away. It could be a matter of weeks away. Next comment, let's see. Tom Humphrey. Just a sec, I'm going to drink a sip of tea. I hope you can't hear my gulps and stuff through the microphone. I don't really care, I'm too tired now. I just want to get this video out. I've been editing so much, and I think I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and I worry too much. Like, I worry about the breathing in, and then I watched other people's videos and I could hear the same sounds. I'm like, well, they're not bothering about them, so why should I? And I'm not rich enough to buy a professional, editor like some people. There's my jealousy coming out. Okay, Tom Humphrey, 3 weeks ago. Some very good ideas here. Thanks, Tom. I agree that a simple left-right spectrum is not sufficient, and adding a second axis for authoritarian, libertarian also doesn't solve the problem. Remember, that's what we saw. We saw originally the individual single-line axis, then we see the two-axis plot, and then we even see a three-axis plot. I also really appreciate the be curious, be humble, defend truth, resist tribalism. So much online discourse is centered around winning instead of searching for truth. Thanks, I really appreciate that. Sometimes I don't always feel like I actually live up to that, and sometimes I think it's hard to kind of like get your emotions and ego separated from that. But I'm really appreciative that that's how it comes across. It sort of sounds like you were saying, interesting. It sort of sounds like you were saying we can't come up with an accurate or near accurate model because cultures and values change too much over time. Interesting take. I can completely understand why you're saying that. Not necessarily. While a good model would be difficult, I do think we can make much better models than just the left-right quadrant models most people use. Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more. I think the problem is these models are looking at surface-level issues instead of the moral foundations people use to determine what they value. Interesting. If we want a better model, we need to start with the foundation. I recommend Jonathan Haidt's book, The Righteous Mind, regarding moral foundations for more on this. I think somebody else, I don't know if it was the same guy, but I'm sure it was somebody else in another video, in an earlier video, recommended this guy. I haven't had the chance to look into it, but I think I did a Google search maybe a month ago. I'm sure maybe it was when this guy did it. I just can't remember responding to him, but I'm sure somebody else mentioned it. I think I've heard this twice, but what we shouldn't do is I shouldn't remain ignorant. If somebody else says to me, look, this guy's already done some work on it, and I've seen this with some people, what they'll do is they'll purposely remain ignorant of it because they want to they feel there's some kind of value in them just independently, just doing things their own way. And I think that's really bad. Look, you've already formed an independent, you've already independently come to that conclusion yourself. However, look, if it's already out there, just look at it. It's the same reason with Popper. I was aware of Popper for many years, and I've been very critical of Marxism for a long time, but then understanding that Popper has a really interesting way of criticizing Marx, why would I ignore it? Okay. I do have a model. It sounds a bit silly, but I think it does work better. Yeah, I'm sure did I include his quotation in the video? Because I think somebody mentioned it to me and I included this height in the video. I got some fillers because I was running out of time because the video was so long and I just needed some filler images, and I'm sure one of Haidt's quotations is there. Okay. I do have a model. It sounds a bit silly, but I think it does work better. 1. Picture an equilateral triangle. The 3 corners of the triangle represent libertarian progressive conservatism. However, keep in mind that these are just labels. What really is important is the moral foundations which describe the 3 corners. An individual can be placed anywhere inside the triangle. The closer the individual is to a particular corner, the more they align with the underlying moral foundations of that corner. Actually, my psychologist friends there's a what's that thing where you get a psychological test based on a triangle, and then you're somewhere on that triangle, and then you're like a type 1, type 2, type 3. And my friend really loves this stuff, and I can't remember the name. Somebody can tell me in the comments. But it kind of reminds me of that. 2, the libertarian corner is focused on freedom. If someone were to be all the way in the libertarian corner, they would essentially be an anarchist. The farther one was away from the corner, the more they are willing to use force. The progressive corner is primarily focused on fairness, or at least what is perceived to be fair, so like equality, I'm presuming. This corner is also generally more compassionate and empathetic, as long as the subject of the compassion is perceived to be treated unfairly by society. You know what it is? These people, I don't think that other people have the same kind of quality of commenters that I do. I think I'm very lucky with what's happened. The conservative corner is primarily focused on stability and preserving institutions. This one is tricky because over time, institutions will change despite what the conservative-minded person would want. And so eventually, the very thing that is being conserved evolves into something different than what it used to be. But even though the surface level issues change, the underlying desire for stability remains. Also, many times conservatives will disagree on what action actually brings about stability, which may cause infighting. But again, the underlying moral foundation is still a desire for stability. Most people would fall somewhere inside the triangle. It would be rare to find somebody all the way in one of the corners. That's quite interesting. You know, if you've developed a system, and sometimes those systems you always have people on the edge, but if you developed a system and very few people will be on the very edges of them, they'll be somewhere inside it. That's actually quite interesting. If that worked, that would actually make the categorization process a lot easier. It would actually make categorization stronger if this actually works. Very, very interesting thing. Anyway, I think this model works well as it explains why different groups agree on certain issues and disagree on others. Some viewpoints lie in between the progressive and libertarian corners, such as pro-choice. Others lie in between the conservative and libertarian corners, such as, sorry, it's really late here, I'm yawning, such as low taxation, and others in between the conservative and progressive corners, such as a willingness to use force or to go to war in certain circumstances. You know, when I saw this comment, I was really, really happy. I saw it in the morning. Obviously, there's a time differential between where I am and where he is. And I was really happy with his comment. You know, it's people like you that I have in mind when I make these videos. Sometimes I wonder whether I'm actually reaching the right audience or whether I'm creating content that people are just listening to for a few minutes, then reacting with any thought. That was a real fear I had at the start of this channel. I think when I made this channel, when this video came out, the channel literally had 35 subscribers. It didn't have 228. It had like 200 less subscribers than it does now. So there's a side of me, like I was putting so much energy, and especially into the writing, I was putting so much energy into the writing, and then I'd spend days in the writing process. And then after that, I'd spend like 12 solid hours, maybe even longer, doing the editing process. And I'd refuse to stop because I'd be like, I need to get this video put out. But then there'll be a part of me that would just be demoralized. And it's like, what are you doing this for? No one's going to watch this shit. And then when I got this reply from this guy, it just made me feel so happy because clearly he's seriously watched the whole video. And not only that, he's trying to engage with the project. Like fucking 35 subscribers, and I've already got people trying to engage with the project. And I'm going to... not this week, maybe in the next week or two. I've got other accounts and stuff, but I'm going to start like releasing the community accounts. I think it might be worthwhile because what I don't want to do is I don't want to lose these people. I really think these people are great. You know, any community that has this kind of person is lucky. That's all I want to say. So yeah, this is me. This is my reply. I sometimes wonder whether my efforts of doing these long form essay videos are wasted. But when I get comments like this, it really makes me happy because I'm glad you appreciated it and that you're also on the same mindset of wanting to constructively work towards actually fixing and improving the current state of affairs. You made a genuinely intelligent input and exactly the kind of discussion I was hoping the video would generate. As I mentioned towards the end of the video, before reconstruction, we must deconstruct. I agree that much better models than the traditional left-right spectrum are possible. And I think you're absolutely right that the most existing models operate too much on this surface level, political positions rather than deep underlying patterns. Haidt is definitely interesting, particularly because he moves the discussion towards psychology and moral intuition rather than purely ideological identification. I looked into this thing. Yeah, I did look into this thing before I spoke to this guy with Haidt. And even earlier than that, I think I was familiar with Haidt. I couldn't remember his name, but I did test this this moral aspect. And I realized that you can't really do it that way. But I completely agree. I completely see where he's coming from because I did the same thing. Your triangle model is far more sophisticated than the simplistic linear or quadrant frameworks that most people default to. And I think there are some interesting reasons as to why the series and published ones tend to fail, which we could discuss in the future. That's a whole video on its own. That's a whole video on its own. And it relates to political science, it relates to what's going on in academia. Again, like this whole project that I'm talking about, it's such a it's like a Pandora's box. When you open one aspect, it just pulls all this other stuff. And I'm going to seriously need help from other people. I can't just do this alone. Because look, even talking about this, I remember this comment that I made to him. And I remember thinking, shit, this is something else I'm going to have to talk about. Political science and academia. And it's too much for one person. This is far too much for one person. I need help. I'm not yet convinced moral foundations themselves are stable enough to fully ground as universal or just realistically more accurate political model. I'd already looked into this quite a long time ago, and I think I did come across Haidt at that time. And yeah, I came to this conclusion because morality, identity, institutions, and social priorities also mutate historically and culturally over time. Biggest issue, especially in the West. And part of what interests me is precisely that instability and fragmentation and when they should be included, disregarded. Because obviously the model that we need, it needs to at least explain all the shit that happened from basically before Marx to now. So everything throughout the 20th century, it needs to be strong enough to kind of explain that. It can't, like, you can't just have a model that is going to explain like the 20 years of like when this fad came out or when this fad came out. But then again, don't get me wrong, I'm fully confident that much more accurate models can be made. But I strongly believe it's going to be pushed forth by regular people like us, and I highly doubt it's going to happen in the politically adjacent traditional Western academia. Again, that's a whole other kettle of fish. It's a whole other project. And please look, if you are of the same mindset as me, create a channel, do the work, right? If you've come to the same conclusions that I have, I'm pretty sure that you also know what I'm talking about here. So please, let's make this a group effort. It's not about me. It's about It's about advancing political understanding together. Thanks again, Tom. You made my morning. Excellent comment. Really excellent comment. I mean, the important thing here is the direction of travel. Like, unlike many of the previous commenters, Tom is not trying to defend an inherited category. Like, he's stopped at that. He's trying to construct something new. He's putting serious effort into it. And throughout this video, we've repeatedly encountered people insisting that there's a single coherent foundation underlying the left. Capitalism, class, power concentration. And Tom is effectively saying that perhaps we're looking at the wrong place altogether. Now, I said it before, I've got big reservations about grounding a political model entirely in moral foundations. It was one of the things, before I built the alternative model that I've got. And you know what? I might release, if I set up a community before the 1,000 mark, and if there are people, sorry, I just accidentally turned the microphone off. If I set up the community, let's say on Discord and stuff like that, and there are people like Tom, it might be worth releasing it, doing a limited release with those people, and then they can then assess it, and then scrutinize it, and then we can fix it, and then we can release it in the channel. I think that's a much better way of doing things. Yeah, I think Tom is just asking the right sort of question. He's not asking, how do we defend the old model? He's saying, how do we build a better one? It's exactly what we should be doing. And Tom's comment, like what he did in that comment, it's valuable because it represents the beginning of that reconstruction process, and that has to happen. But I think before we do that, we really have to deconstruct thoroughly. We really have to encounter more of these people, these contrarians, and really fight them head on. Not fight them, that's the wrong language. Argue with them head on. Because they are testing us and we are testing them. And, you know, if they can really debunk it, then there's no reason to pursue. And I can change the name of this channel to Left. It's never going to be right. I hope you realize that, you know, before I came into this this journey, I was a self-identified leftist and not a rightist. You know, the temptation is always to rush towards a new framework before we've properly understood the limitations of the old one. We really need to interrogate the limitations of the old one. And I think more time is needed and more contributors are required before the next stage unfolds. We need to get to another level. We need to get to another critical mass. And I think 1,000 is enough. I think by that time I'll have made enough of an imprint. I'm pretty sure Baden Panada's aware of me, even though he doesn't want to engage with me. Deculturation's aware, but it's more than this. It needs to have an imprint on the right and other people. There needs to be a larger audience. There needs to be people who've got like more solid political science backgrounds who can really interrogate it and show. Because political science does discuss this stuff. Like, I'm not, like, I didn't. This thing didn't come out of nowhere, by the way. Yeah, let's just be aware of that. Right. This video is becoming very long, and you can probably hear my throat's getting very croaky. So let's get on to the third category. And, you know, I've got some shitty comments, as YouTubers have. To be fair, I don't think I've got that many shitty comments. I think because this kind of channel is insulated from those kinds of people, because the more drama I do, I think the more of those kinds of comments I'd have. But like the more boring fucking essays that I do, it's just gonna attract a different kind of person. But I do get negative comments, and probably the worst comment I got was on this video. So are we ready? Here we are. ShadowMark 474. I'm going to put on a bit of a voice for this. 11 days ago. What are you exactly, ideologically? I'm not watching an hour-long video from someone who just doesn't understand the concept behind a model being both flawed and useful at the same time. Leftists use the term to align with other leftists on political grounds for the practical purpose of advancing mutually beneficial causes. Everyone on the left uses the political compass as a vague but useful tool to determine whether other people or groups are worth aligning with or not. Yeah, and look what we've got with that. The left starts at anti-capitalism is a common adage precisely because capitalism is the current status quo, so any groups or people that are opposition to capitalism can be aligned for practical purposes. If you're pro-capitalism, then it doesn't matter what arguments you make, the left will exclude you from it, and that's useful for them to do because you're not aligned on the issue of capitalism. On the other hand, if you're anti-capitalism, then it doesn't matter what arguments you make, the left will include you in it. Really? Well, so you can be a racist. And that's useful for them to do because you're aligned on the issue of capitalism. And you do get those people. I'm not creating a straw man there. When a leftist says colloquially that a person or group isn't on the left, that should be understood as they are not sufficiently anti-status quo to be positioned alongside myself. If you put a syndicalist, a Marxist-Leninist, an anarchist, and a Maoist in a room together, there will be plenty of disagreement and factionalism, but none of them would disagree that any of them are to the left of liberals. And that's all it comes down to. People use language in a way that is useful for conveying information What a fucking patronizer. No one is under any illusion that the entire political spectrum can be broken into a single left-right axis. Completely wrong. As you said at the beginning, that's ridiculous. Instead of investigating why people continue to use it, you've assumed that everyone who does is ignorant of that obvious fact. Completely wrong. Completely wrong. And the comments alone prove that's wrong. I have no idea what your goal is with this channel. Is it just to unite people with incoherent ideologies under the ideology of not adhering to a political ideology? Do you plan to organize in real life and actually have an effect on real-world politics? If yes, then for what end? If no, then I don't see why you even exist. Just slow videos to pay the bills. Fucking hell. Fucking hell. Also, you should understand that fascists have historically called themselves beyond left and right, so that's going to be most leftist first impression of your channel name. Fucking hell, man, seriously. Right, so I was just shocked when I got this. Here at Beyond Left and Right, I encourage healthy dialogue and argumentation, but this comment is so utterly awful in terms of your arguments and bad faith sentiment that I will make a video this weekend specifically for you, my friend. I think the community will learn a lot from it. See you on the weekend. Now, that was supposed to be for last weekend, but I was just too busy. I didn't have the time, so I'm doing it now. He's defending it. It's bad faith. He's defending its bad faith. It's bad faith because your entire channel seems in bad faith. If my comment can convince you to make it clear what your political goals are, then I guess I've done some good. At least, I hope you do that. My questions aren't unreasonable, just combative. And it's hardly fair for you to complain about that, since you started it. Right, okay. Fucking hell. Right, so that was the ugly comment. I think I'm going to do the thumbnail for this video, the good, the bad, and the ugly. What's interesting about this comment isn't just the hostility. Hostility towards strangers on the internet is just business as usual, let's be honest. What makes this comment interesting, not just in its like nastiness, is that it highlights a group of people who contribute to one of the biggest problems in modern political discourse. It's a group who drag everything to the bottom and retard any kind of progress. Let's look at it in detail. The very first sentence reads, I'm not watching an hour-long video. Well, second sentence, I'm not watching an hour-long video from someone who just doesn't understand the concepts behind a model being both flawed and useful at the same time. Think about that for a moment. They unashamedly announce that they are unwilling to engage with the argument and then immediately proceed to explain why the argument is wrong. Now, is that rational at all? So we've all glanced at something and formed an opinion before examining the full argument. The difference is that most people don't then confidently lecture others about a position they have openly admitted they haven't investigated. Well, not unless they're someone like FD signifier. A large part of the Dunning-Kruger effect is not simply ignorance. It's ignorance combined with delusional levels of confidence. It's the belief that one already possesses enough information to reach a conclusion before the investigation's even begun. And this is a classic example right here. It's just comical. They've already decided what the channel is. They've already decided what my motivations are. And they've already decided what my conclusions must be, all before watching the video. The other thing, he reminds me of how Trump deals with new information. Like, he pretends that he knew it all along, and it's a classic sign of egomaniacal behavior. No one is under any illusion that the entire political spectrum can be broken into a single left-right axis. Like, what are you talking about? That's exactly what the issue is. That's literally what the issue is. The issue is that the entire political spectrum is broken down into a single left-right axis. So you're wrong about that. You're completely wrong about that. If that's true, if what you're saying is true, why do so many people become defensive whenever the left-right spectrum is even criticized? Why have I spent weeks arguing with people insisting that the left is a clear and coherent foundation? Why have we spent this entire comment section moving between anti-capitalism, class, anti-authoritarianism, moral foundations? If everybody already understood the limitations of the framework, none of these arguments would be necessary. What are you talking about? And the reality is that many people like this only discover the limitations of a framework after those limitations have been pointed out to them. And once they've recognized the problem, there's often a curious tendency to behave as though they recognized it all along. Oh, yeah. And it's exactly the same thing. We've all seen this happen. As I predicted it, we saw it in the FD Signifier debacle. An idea is initially mocked or dismissed, then it's criticized, then it's reluctantly acknowledged, then eventually becomes obvious and everyone claims they always knew it. And if you just open my videos, open this video, open the 4 Bad and Panada FD Signifier videos, just expand all the comments, look at the dates that people are commenting, and you'll see that same evolution. The very first comments on my channel were just mocking and like, you don't have a fucking clue what you're talking about. You don't understand the left and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, and a lot of them, they're a lot younger than me, and they've probably not even done any real activism, which I have done throughout all my life. But they just assume, they just throw these assumptions at you, like you're just some fucker. Now, what happened is, after about after about the 100 subscriber limit, those comments just disappeared. Like, people stopped dismissing me completely, and then they started engaging seriously, and then you start seeing that because they realize, oh, actually, this person he has actually read. I can assume that he's read to a certain level from the way he's talking and the way he's interacting. What's even more amusing with this guy's comment is that halfway through the comment, he accidentally walks straight back into one of the arguments we've already spent considerable time discussing and debunking. So he tells us that everybody already understands the limitations of the left-right spectrum, and apparently nobody is under any illusion that political reality can be reduced to a single axis, which I think, like, the general thing isn't novel, but me describing it that way, that's my contribution, let's be honest. But according to him, this is all completely obvious. He knew it all along. Excellent. In that case, why are you trying to save it? Because only a few sentences later, we're told that the left is fundamentally united through opposition to capitalism. Now, hold on a second. We've already discussed that argument. In fact, one of the previous commenters spent several paragraphs attempting to establish anti-capitalism as the coherent foundation underlying the left. And it wouldn't even surprise me if he just read that one and then copied it. That commenter was trying to rescue the category. He was trying to explain why the category remained meaningful despite all of its internal contradictions. But ShadowMark has just told us that everybody already understands that the category is flawed and incomplete. So which is it? Is the framework obviously inadequate, or is anti-capitalism the thing that makes it coherent? Is it inadequate or is it coherent? Inadequate, coherent. Because these are not the same arguments. One argument says that the framework is fundamentally limited. The other is an attempt to explain why the framework still works. So you're disappearing up your own arse. And what's fascinating is that he seems completely unaware that he's oscillating between these two positions. The moment criticism appears, the framework becomes vague, flexible, and imperfect. And the moment defense is required, the framework suddenly acquires a clear boundary and a coherent definition. The goalposts don't merely move, they hop around the field like a hyperactive frog. And this is precisely the pattern we've been observing throughout the comment section. Whenever the left is criticized, we're told the category is broad, nuanced, complicated, and impossible to define too rigidly. And then whenever the left is defended, we're suddenly informed that there is a clear foundation underneath it all. Anti-capitalism, class, labor, anti-authoritarianism, take your pick. The foundation changes depending on who is speaking, on who is commenting. But the certainty never seems to diminish. Have you noticed that? Just look through all my comments, look through all of the different arguments. Yeah. Genuine intellectual confidence operates in a different way. The more seriously you investigate complex subjects, the more aware you become of what you don't know. The people sitting at the very bottom of the Dunning-Kruger curve often imagine themselves standing on top of a mountain, looking down at everyone else. In reality, they're standing at the bottom of a valley and mistaking it for the summit. I have no idea what your goal is with this channel. Yeah, I can see that very, very painfully. Is it just to unite people with incoherent ideologies under the ideology of not adhering to a political ideology? I mean, I had to reread that 3 times just to figure out which ideology was supposed to be ideologizing the ideology. Like, I think we've reached the point where the sentence is now recursively defining itself. I need to drink a tea. Just a sec. Oh, this one's funny as well. Do you plan to organize in real life and actually have an effect on real world politics? If yes, then for what end? If no, then I don't see why you even exist. I should just end myself. I should just end myself now then, huh? Apparently, the only reason somebody should make political content is if they're organizing a movement, running for office, or building a party. Like the possibility that somebody might be trying to improve political understanding through healthy dialogue seems not to have occurred to him. And this one's funny. This last bit here. Just slop videos to pay the bills. Like, the purpose is very clear. It's to advance political understanding without being constrained within the left-right false dichotomy. I mean, if I was doing this to pay the bills, I'm really going about this the wrong way. Because, like, if FD Signifier is playing the grifting game on easy mode, then Bard and Panada is playing the grifting game on hard mode, and I'm fucking playing the game on legendary mode because I've gone about this whole paying the bills business in completely the wrong way. It's going to take me so much more time to find those scattered people who have independently arrived at this conclusion, as well as those good faith actors who are genuinely dissatisfied with the current state of affairs. I mean, because those people are like diamonds. Then if I just created another out-of-the-box leftist channel, I could even have an associated gaming channel, a Twitch stream, and do all of the things that all the box cutter YouTubers do to grow as quickly as possible. But I'm not doing that, am I? And maybe you can glean something about my real motivations in all of this by that alone. And then it just gets worse. This part here. Fucking... Also, you should understand that fascists have historically called themselves beyond left and right, so that's going to be most leftists' first impression of your channel name. Yeah, you and your unhinged personality is clearly not representative of anything, let alone any kind of leftist. And here we go again. It's the same tired old distraction tactic. Nazis hiding in every closet and under every rug. Do I have to spell out the utter illogical nature of this argument? I mean, there's jumping to conclusions, then there's leaping, then there's fucking pole vaulting, which is what this is. If you have problems with the left-right political spectrum, you're secretly a fascist. I mean, you know, I did reference, what is it? Zog Slave in FD Signifier and Bad and Panada, so obviously I am a fascist. It's utter nonsense because lots of people from all kinds of backgrounds have had problems with it, with the left-right spectrum, not simply fascists. George Orwell criticized conventional left-right categories at various points. Simone Weil criticized party politics and ideological labels. Murray Bookchin spent decades attacking conventional left-right thinking. Many anarchists have done the same. Many libertarians have done the same. Marxists have done it. Many political scientists, I mean, in political science alone, they've done the same. I mean, you got to be careful with how you argue because you've got to have a look and see what the political scientists themselves are saying. And I've done that. I've included some of that research in previous videos. I think I included it in this video, didn't I? It's been a while, but I think I did. A lot of people think Hitler had brown eyes, but actually he had blue eyes. So if you've got blue eyes, then you're a fascist. This kind of person is the exact opposite to the people I mentioned in category 2. I said those people present arguments, but they aren't personally and emotionally attached to those arguments. They genuinely want to make serious advances in their own political understandings. So they approach you with this kind of polite inquisitiveness that's so genuine. And you've seen that with most of the people in the comments. They're very nice people. This person is so irrational and continuously jumps to conclusions that they spit poison in the process. And that poison, when it comes from someone who self-identifies as a leftist, is very predictably to label you as a fascist or a Nazi at the slightest disagreement. This is exactly the kind of person I don't want coming to this kind of community. And it doesn't matter what political ideology they subscribe to. Their toxic personalities always trump whatever ideology they purport to adhere to. and ultimately they're a liability for whatever cause they're part of. It's kind of like the God that failed hypothesis with Hitchens. Hitchens was like supposedly a Marxist. I mean, if you look at Hitchens' history and his class background, look at his class background, his background. There's a good case to be made. He was probably an intelligence asset of the British intelligence services, but he was supposedly a serious Marxist, which I don't think he was. And then he just quickly jumps and flips over, and he's with the neocons. I mean, but his prickish behavior never changed. Like the extremist never stops being an extremist, whether they like are kind of like, an ISIS terrorist or a American terrorist. It doesn't change. And I've seen people do that. They flip to like such extreme positions. Okay, let's end on a nice note, because that wasn't very nice, was it? Here we go. Bad and Panada versus fart sniffing leftists. This made me feel good. Wow, holy, just stumbled upon your channel and I am blown away. Keep up the good work, friend. Thanks so much. As we speak, I'm doing my next video responding to your comments, so I'll definitely be featuring this one as an example of a supporter. Thanks again and take care. Oh, wonderful. My name is Graham, if you care to mention. Will do, Graham. Thanks again. So yeah, while I've been recording this video, I've taken a couple of breaks. I got a comment notification, and in my reply, I mentioned I was in the process of doing a feature on the commenters of my channel. So I'm going to end this video with Graham. I'm very glad that you found the channel, Graham, and I'm happy that you appreciate the work. I got a lot of positive comments like yours in the other videos, and the recurring theme was about finding somewhere truly different and knew that people had been frustrated about not finding it before. And that's exactly why I embarked upon this project. My position is that if we just allow ourselves to think critically about the very assumptions our politics are based on, we will see that a lot of those assumptions are nonsensical. So naturally, I believe that there are many more people out there who are just like us, who don't fit into these broken tribes and who have independently come to the same conclusions regarding the broken framework that we are herded into. The challenge, therefore, is that we just have to find those people. And I think over time, we're going to slowly aggregate more and more like-minded people together. So I hope I can live up to your expectations. And I hope that as the channel grows, that realization will become manifest. Thank you for watching, guys. I'm beyond left and right, and I suspect that you are too. Take care.